Gormagat Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, I welcome the long-awaited publication yesterday of the 3 external reports examining governance, human resources and finances at RTE. But as we review the content of those reports, I think people around the country are amazed and alarmed that our national broadcaster, the organisation to whom they pay the licence fee every year, continues to be mired in controversy. Because in more than 400 pages, the reports cover barter accounts, broken relationships, feckless governance, and a culture which saw perks for some and dodgy contracts for the rest. And indeed, there's some startling content in there. RTE claimed to have lost records of the now infamous barter account, described as hiding in plain sight, and elsewhere accounting transactions were described as fictitious. Well, it's welcome that both the Government and RTE have accepted all 116 recommendations in principle, particularly those relating to the scandalous treatment of staff at RTE. And I'm talking in particular about the practice of bogus self-employment contracts, contracts which we know deprive hard-working staff of so much, of access to mortgage approval, maternity pay, pension entitlements. Taoiseach, I've heard from people who cannot retire or take sick leave or holidays, all because RTE will not recognise that they are employees. And some of these have worked in the organisation for decades. My colleague Senator Marie Sherlock has spoken before about the upstairs-downstairs culture pertaining in RTE, where workers on bogus self-employment contracts were paying for the flahula spending of those at the top. But Taoiseach, we must do more than cut, 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 because curbing excess without delivering on decency and decent standards will do as much harm as good. Already we know that the Department of Social Protection's scope investigation does not cover all the workers who are being exploited at RTE, and it's scandalous that any employee of a state agency should be miscategorised in this way. Yet at RTE we know it was widespread, and that's not good enough, because good journalism matters. A lesser mentioned story in the press today is about a study carried out by Dr. Eileen Cullity, who warns that parts of Ireland risk becoming news deserts, or areas which lack a reliable news service. And everyone across the country should have access to accurate and up-to-date news and information. At this time of so much fake news, it's all the more important that we are able to trust those who report the news, and that's especially important of our national broadcaster RTE. Yet the reputation of so many hard-working journalists has been hurt over reckless governance at RTE. So Taoiseach, in your limited time left in government, you and Minister Martin and the Cabinet have important decisions to make. We understand RTE has been given 6 weeks to outline how recommendations will be implemented, but Taoiseach, it also falls to you, the government of this country, to make a decision, to present a plan as to how to resource our national broadcaster sustainably. We know you've been able to commission the reports. I've welcomed the publication of those reports, but it's time to make decisions. So Taoiseach, when will we have an announcement on the sustainable funding model for RTE? And as part of that announcement, will there be a dedicated fund to end the practice of bogus self-employment contracts for all at RTE?
Thank you, Deputy Bacik. Taoiseach.
I want to thank Deputy Bacik for raising this matter, and I was very pleased that yesterday Minister Catherine Martin brought to Government the 3 reviews that you've referenced into RTE. The reviews prepared by the Independent Expert Advisory Committees, the review of governance and culture, and the review of contractor fees, HR and other matters in RTE. And Minister Martin also brought the Mazar's final report on the RTE barter account. I do genuinely believe that these reports path a way forward, show us a way forward, show us the opportunity to get to where you aspire to, and I think where all parties aspire to, and I think where the people of this country aspire to, a better supported, better resourced, better run and better functioning RTE, and a real value on public service broadcasting. And I hope yesterday marked an opportunity to begin to turn the page in terms of not just looking back in terms of what was a very dire situation around governance and other matters, but actually beginning to look forward in terms of implementing the recommendations. Because we've been saying for a while now, these 2 independent reports were the first reports that actually produced recommendations. Every other report, while valuable or useful, told us what went wrong. We now have 116 recommendations across the reports, 101 of which are for RTE, 15 of which are for Government. Government at its meeting yesterday accepted the 15 that are for us. RTE, I welcome, as you do, that they have accepted the recommendations. They now need to come back to Government within 6 weeks with a very robust response and implementation plan. And Minister Martin appraised Government yesterday of how she and her department intends to oversee and monitor the implementation of that plan. In relation to the issue around bogus self-employment, there were two important recommendations re the scope, and one was to intensify the engagement between the Department of Social Protection and RTE, and secondly was for the Department and RTE to positively consider a mediation process to try and help fast-track the process for the very reasons you highlight in terms of the real impact that this has had on workers, often lower paid workers in RTE at a time of largesse for some. That sense of lower paid workers, or just quite frankly normal workers going about their businesses, missing out and being mistreated as well. Just in relation to the issue of funding, this is the government that will settle the question in terms of how to sustainably fund RTE and public service broadcasting. We reaffirmed that at Cabinet yesterday. The three leaders in the coalition, the leaders of the three parties, of which I'm one, are committed to that, and it is our intention to make a decision in relation to funding by the summer break. I think it's important that we do that. There's probably two options on the table. Different parties in this House have their views. I welcome that. It's good to have those debates. But ultimately, there is a rubber hits the road moment here in terms of RTE responding with the full implementation plan, and that being an enabler to government for once and for all, being able to make a decision on sustainable funding. I do want to acknowledge the Trojan work done by Minister Catherine Martin in very difficult circumstances over a sustained period of time that has helped bring us to this point today. And she will be, and this will be, the government and the Minister who will resolve the funding issue.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Bacik.
Well, I thank you for the response and for reaffirming your commitment to settle this issue in the lifetime of this government, and indeed for providing me with that time frame of giving the plan for making the decision for the sustainable future funding model by the summer recess. That's very welcome. But I am mindful of the concerns expressed by Seamus Dooley of the National Union of Journalists when he responded to the publication of the reports by pointing out the real risks of delay, particularly if there is a legislative change in the funding structure. He also points out that the shadow of bogus self-employment has long lingered over RTE, and indeed that it's not confined to RTE. So while I do very much welcome your provision of a time frame for the decision on the sustainable funding model, and while I also welcome your reference to those key recommendations on ending the practice of bogus self-employment, I would also ask Taoiseach, what about other organisations? Are there other organisations around the country where this state-run organisations where this practice is an issue, and is there a plan in government to tackle this? And I do very much welcome that proposal, as I say, that you'll be making the decision on future funding models by the summer recess, but you might explain precisely how that is to be done, given the limited time left to us and given the fact that we are also seeing local and European elections within that time frame.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
So thanks very much to Deputy Bacik for that. Look, we will obviously have to work with parties in this House in terms of any legislative proposals that we bring forward. My commitment, though, is that we make the policy decision at Cabinet in terms of the future funding by the summer recess. That will obviously require, and I think Minister Martin has been very clear on this, when you look through the 15 recommendations that pertain to government, there is going to be a clear need for legislative change. So wherever we land on a funding model, somewhat regardless of that, there is going to need to be a piece, or certainly in addition to that, there is going to need to be a piece of legislation brought forward. My understanding is our initial thinking is one piece of legislation to address a range of changes that are likely to be needed to the Broadcasting Act, the Controller and Auditor General being one change that I'm eager to see government progress. So decision by the summer recess, whatever legislation will flow, the publication of a general scheme, the opportunity for scrutiny, and a willingness on the part of this government to work with the opposition in terms of how we best advance that legislation.
Thank you.